tonight. Winds staying light with some patchy mist and fog later. Then cloudy across most of Wales with some clearer spells in the east. Winds increasing at the coast with rain arriving in from the west later. Taking a look at the Midlands, it'll be much cloudier there, particularly in the evening across the region, but staying mostly dry. Some clearer spells at times. Southeasterly winds remaining light, however, it will be breezy over high ground. And remaining cloudy across the northeast with outbreaks of light rain and drizzle, some clearer spells confined to the west, breezy at the coasts, but lighter winds inland. And staying dry across most of southern Scotland. Cloudy in the east, patchy light rain and drizzle at times, breezy at the coasts, particularly in the west. And cloudy, wet and windy across most of Northern Ireland, however drier in the far east, rain continuing to move slowly east through the evening, heavy at times. So dry then with clear spells, mainly in the southeast, but rain sometimes heavy, sometimes slowly eastwards, strong winds in the west.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales
and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is Associate Editor at the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, also former Liberal Democrat MP, Lembit Opik. Before we get started, he's never off the channel. Let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, 1 minute past 4. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. His Majesty King Charles has led the Remembrance Sunday service for the first time as sovereign following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. The King and the Prince of Wales laid a wreath of poppies at the cenotaph in central London. The wreath incorporated a ribbon which paid tribute to his late mother and grandfather King George by using their horse racing colours. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and former Prime Ministers were also in attendance. 10,000 Royal British Legion veterans representing 300 different members of the armed forces took part in a march to honour the war dead. And a further 10,000 members of the public lined the streets of Whitehall to watch on and pay their respects. While the nation fell silent to honour those fallen in the line of duty. Big Ben chimed 11 times at 11 o'clock to mark the start of the nationwide 2-minute silence. Services were held across the country, with bells ringing to commemorate all those who lost their lives. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace also commemorated the fallen and paid tribute to Ukrainians currently fighting for their freedom.
Today is a reminder that we've suffered wars in Europe before, and tens of thousands of British service personnel gave their lives, as did civilians, to defeat fascism. And here we are again, tragically, decades later, with a war on continental Europe in Ukraine. What Remembrance is about is recognising that freedom isn't free. People make sacrifices. This nation made the ultimate sacrifice on 2 occasions in the Great Wars, but also on other conflicts since, and Remembrance is a time to reflect on that.
The Prime Minister has taken off to travel to the G20 summit in Indonesia, where he'll call out Putin's regime over the war in Ukraine. Rishi Sunak will join the annual gathering of world leaders, saying this year's meeting will not be business as usual, with the focus on how countries can work together to solve global economic and security challenges. President Putin will miss the event and send his Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov instead. The Chancellor has warned there will be very difficult decisions ahead of his upcoming autumn budget. Jeremy Hunt has warned that taxes will rise following his statement to the House of Commons on Thursday as he tries to balance the public books. He's thought to be considering a range of options, including an extended freeze on income tax and national insurance thresholds. Labour says further austerity is not the way forward. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says at least 6 people have been killed and 53 wounded in an explosion in Istanbul. The blast happened in a busy area of central Istanbul in Turkey in the Taksim Square area. Emergency services were called to the scene and quickly cordoned off the area. It's still unclear what caused the explosion. And 6 people are dead after 2 planes crashed into each other at a World War II airshow in the US state of Texas. The crash happened yesterday during flying demonstrations at the Wings Over Dallas event, which honours veterans. Videos posted online show the 2 planes colliding and crashing on the ground before bursting into flames at the Dallas Executive Airport. Firefighters say nobody on the ground was injured. The number of migrants who've crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year has now surpassed 41,000. GBNews understands around 300 migrants have been taken to Dover Harbour after attempting the journey so far today. Border Force vessels and RNLI lifeboats are also responding to a number of other small boat sightings off the Kent coast. Meanwhile, Downing Street says talks on a deal with France over Channel crossings are in their final stages. And England have been crowned the T20 Cricket World Cup champions in Melbourne after beating Pakistan by 5 wickets. Ben Stokes was England's hero once again, taking them over the line with an over to spare. The victory marks the 2nd time the team has won the T20 World Cup, and they're now the first to hold both global white ball trophies, having won the 50-over World Cup in 2019. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana Akua.
Good afternoon. It is fast approaching 7 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, yesterday, I was quite annoyed when I saw this. An Albanian protest where their flag was draped around Churchill in complaint for the treatment of the Channel migrants. Now, the irony here is that Winston Churchill, who served as the Conservative Prime Minister twice from 1940 to 1945 and led Britain to victory in the Second World War, fought against the dark forces of fascism. Ultimately, the fight was for democracy. And without Churchill, their protest may not have even been possible. And today is Remembrance Sunday. And as Big Ben chimed 11 times to mark a 2-minute silence in memory of those who died fighting for the freedoms we all take for granted, I asked myself, would the young in this country today be prepared to die for the freedom that our veterans sacrificed their lives for all those years ago? It makes me immensely proud to be part of this great nation and hugely proud to be British, which is why I find it somewhat disgusting when those who come to this country, many exploiting the generous nature of it, denigrate it. We should be proud of inspirational leaders like Churchill. Sure, they made mistakes, but he stood up to Hitler. About 20 million people died in the First World War and around about 50 million in the Second. And you only need to look at the unprovoked war in Ukraine when Russian forces descended. The majority of the world believed that the Russian army would overpower that of Ukraine. Now, they thought that the war would be over in a matter of weeks, but 9 months later, and Ukraine are taking back their land. What set them aside from the superior firepower of the Russian army was their resolve and their fight for democracy. If we learn anything from the lessons of the past, we must learn that without democracy, we have nothing. Rishi Sunak said, "This year, more than ever, we are reminded of the huge debt of gratitude we owe those who lay their lives down to protect their country." As we fall silent together in Remembrance Sunday, we will honour the memories of the men and women who have lost and pay tribute to the brave soldiers of Ukraine as they continue their fight for freedom. In the words of Ben Wallace, we must never forget those who gave their lives in defence of our values and our great nation. Right, so before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is Brexit to blame for the migrant crisis? And according to government figures, more than 40,000 migrants reached British shores alone this year, and over 10,000 of those who have made it over are from Albania. Now, the Albanian Prime Minister weighed in on the migrant debate and attributed blame to Brexit, having claimed that the country needs to fill tough jobs British kids aren't keen to do, like factory work. So I'm asking, is Brexit to blame for the crisis? Then at 4:50, it's World View. I'll be speaking to an ex-Russian spy who infiltrated drug gangs and even fell in love with one of her targets. Alia Rosa studied at the same KGB school as Russian President Vladimir Putin and was taught to seduce men as a weapon. She'll be on later. And then at 5, it's Outside the Chase. Of course, Sean Wallace, who's best known for being one of the 6 chasers on the hit TV quiz show The Chase, will be live in the studio. He's also a qualified barrister, having worked at the Old Bailey. And when Sean isn't quizzing, he throws himself into charity work, most notably opening several houses in the North East in a bid to help homeless people off the streets. Well, stay with me, that's all on the way. Tell me what you think as ever on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Right, let's get started. Let's welcome again to my panel Associate Editor at the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and also former Liberal Democrat MP, Lembit Opik. Again.
He's been talking about the jungle quite a lot.
Has he?
An army of one.
How many interviews have you done?
About 75, because I'm the only person in Britain who seems to think it's OK for Matt Hancock to be in the jungle.
What do you think? Do you think it's OK, Andrew?
No.
No.
And I've been watching the programme for the first time in my life, and I've been voting for him to do the bush trucker trials.
Yeah, but it's not fair on the others. I want to see some of the others do that stuff as well.
He's going to get lumbered every night he's in there.
Yeah.
I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's got to be that way. It's fair enough. I think.
There's penance, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, so what's your view on this then? Of course, it is Remembrance. It's a very poignant time in the history of this country, and in fact of the world. In fact, because there were 2 big world wars. How do you feel about today?
My view is that we are in such danger of forgetting those lessons of history. Why? Because I was saying to Andrew before, we're pretty much the first generation in this country that hasn't been conscripted to fight a war in really 3-4 generations. And that makes you complacent. The war sort of happens somewhere else, and we've got a paid army instead of conscript army. So if we don't want to fight, we don't have to. But boy, if you speak to people from Ukraine and elsewhere, wherever you stand on those wars, lives get destroyed. I'm actually here because of World War II, because my parents had to get out because of the total disruption of their lives. They didn't all get out. A large proportion of my family were actually exterminated by the Soviets. So it's still raw in my family. What do I think about what should happen? I think you said something really interesting in your monologue. If people have a very strong motivation, that usurps even superior firepower. Same thing happened in Vietnam, by the way. The North Vietnamese really wanted to win. The South Vietnamese didn't feel so strongly, and the Americans didn't really. The soldiers were the fall guys there. So all I can say is let's try and maintain the memory of those who died for our freedom.
I completely concur with that. And I was rather shocked a few weeks ago, a survey showing barely a fifth of people, young people under the age of 25, thought Churchill was a very proud part of Britain. What have they not done? What do they teach them at school now? An enormously important figure, symbolic, horrifying, by the way, to see those Albanian protesters draping their national flag.
Terrible.
Because we've already had the people who want to pull down statues, daubing it with red paint. Look, Churchill had faults. Of course he did. Nobody said he's a deity or a god, but he was a fantastic war leader whose brilliant skills of oratory inspired the British people. My mother was evacuated twice. My father lived in the East End during the war, bombs coming down. So the war was very significant in my family, and it's right that we're marking it today. I thought Charles did it very well. It was very poignant, actually, that it was King Charles and not the Queen, of course. We've got to honour and respect it. And as Lemit said, who'd have thought the most serious conflict on European soil since the Second World War going on right now, and Britain is a major player in that conflict.
I mean, I concur with everything you're saying as well, but I worry because I don't think young people would do it. I don't think that young people would want to be conscripted in the way. I don't think they'll be part of a war, even if it became something like Ukraine. I mean, you saw the way the Ukrainian people rallied behind all the young people so passionate about their land and their country. I think we're losing a level of patriotism. I think a lot of it stems from the woke ideology where you can't be patriotic, you can't be proud to be British, you can't even, you can't say that you love this country. There's so many things that I think you're almost castigated for doing that.
If this country hadn't welcomed my family in, I would never have existed. They'd have been exterminated back in Estonia. I would never dream of disrespecting the war leader that saved the world from the Nazis. Because if it hadn't been for Britain, the whole of the European continent would have been the Third Reich. Now, the point that you've both made really does bother me, because I think that woke culture you described almost makes it a dirty word to say you're patriotic. Now, I was very honoured. I've always felt honoured to have served in the British democracy because of my background. And yet you've got these people daubing the statues of world-changing leaders. I don't mean Liz Truss type people, world-changing leaders.
Well, she changed the world, but it wasn't
Well,
necessarily
not for the better, yeah. And so it does bother me. One sign of hope, though, I think, if Britain was really, really threatened, I still like to think the British population would step up to the plate.
Yeah, I hope you're right. The other day on GB News, on my Friday programme, I talked to this remarkable woman, 99 years old. She was part of the Bletchley, the operation to break the Enigma code, which she was modest, she was incredibly articulate, and it's difficult for her to talk about it because that generation just didn't talk about what they did in the war. But she was one of those people looking at all these telegraphs, translating what was pouring out from Germany. And I said, she said, it's just modest what I did. No, it was an extraordinary thing what she did. And there were extraordinary challenges and sacrifices made during the war. And it's carrying on now. I think I'm very proud of the fact that Britain is really engaged with Ukraine. Whatever people say about Boris Johnson, we were the first to arm them a year before the conflict started. Great to see Ben Wallace, our Defence Secretary, former Army officer. That's good. I think we need more. I'd like to see more Army officers and RAF officers and Navy officers in the Commons, actually. And as for those young people, I think I'm probably with you. I think that unless They're crossing the channel, invading us. I'm not talking about boats. I'm not talking about small boats. I'm talking about an actual invasion. Surely they would take up arms then.
I don't know. I think they don't. A lot of people don't realise how generous this government is as well. I mean, my parents obviously have come from Africa. I was born in Newcastle, and I went to Africa. I've been a couple of times to Ghana, and you know, the way the benefit system help people is that when they come to this country, and the way this system is, the NHS, even though it is on its knees at the moment, but all the way it's organised to look after people, you don't get that in many countries around the world, even in some of the ones around Europe. So people need to understand that.
It's comparatively under strain, but it's still one of the reasons to live here. And just one other thought. When people go on about the horrendousness of the British Empire, once again, as Andrew said, it was obviously flawed and a lot of self-interest. One reason Britain is comparatively rich as a small island is because it acquired wealth from its empire. But a lot of places are a lot better than they would have been if Britain had never done that.
Quite right. I mean, we're probably talking about this later, but we're always apologising for what Britain did. The Industrial Revolution brought great progress to the world, and life expectancy increased dramatically in some of these countries, which we're now apparently got to pay compensation or reparations to, of which we'll be talking later, of course.
Reparations later.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Just the use of the word reparations.
I mean, how far do you want to go back with that stuff? I mean, we could go back to the history of mankind. And
well, we'll be going back to... When this discussion, we're going to go back to Roman times, because they enslaved a lot of British people, did the Romans.
But Boadicea, she was quite cruel. I think we should apologise for that.
Yeah, I think we should, because she had those spikes on her
that's right,
wheels,
I mean, what's health and safety?
The Queen of the Iceni.
Well, the full trail goes back to Africa, so it's my fault.
It's all your fault. Exactly. We were just getting round to that.
Sorry, folks. It's my fault. Right, if you just tuned in, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, it's just fast approaching 19 minutes after 4 o'clock after the break. Our Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, is Brexit to blame for the migrant crisis? According to government figures, more than 40,000 migrants have reached British shores this year. That includes 10,000 from Albania. Now, the Albanian Prime Minister blamed Brexit for the record numbers, claiming that the country needs to fill tough jobs that British people aren't doing. But is Brexit really to blame? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Send me them via GBNews at gbnews.uk. Tell me what you think. You can also tweet me at GBNews. I have a poll up right now asking, is Brexit to blame for the migrant crisis? Cast your vote now. First, it's time for a break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Good afternoon. If you've just joined me, where have you been? This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Now, before the break, I was discussing Remembrance Sunday. Let's see what you've been saying. Now, this is Rebecca. Rebecca says, hi, Nana. How dare Albanian immigrants, mostly who are here illegally, drape their flag on one of the most important figures in our history? They should be rounded up and deported immediately. The British people are getting fed up. Thank you for that. Yeah. Christian says, great monologue, Nana. Remembrance is so important to me, and the current state of the world really brings me down. Peter says, well said, you absolute star. I love Peter. Thank you. Yes, we need to be proud and not denigrate this great nation. If immigrants don't like things, then please feel free to leave and return to places like Albania. Fair enough. Keep your thoughts coming. It's lovely that you're getting in touch. Keep them coming. It's now time, though, for our great British debate this hour. I'm asking, is Brexit to blame for the migrant crisis? Now, according to government figures, more than 40,000 have crossed the English Channel this year alone. And this is more than the 2 previous years combined. So over 10,000 of those who have actually arrived in this country have come from Albania. Now, earlier, the Albanian Prime Minister, Edi Rama, blamed the current migrant crisis on Brexit, saying the tough job roles need to be filled, and he used sectors such as agriculture and factory work as an example, claiming that British kids aren't keen to do those kind of jobs. And to add fuel to the fire, he also called on the Home Secretary to write a letter of apology, here we go, after using the word invasion to describe the migrant crisis, as he believes it stirs up hatred. But on the other hand, on the other side, many have blamed the bureaucracy within the Home Office and tensions with France on the current crisis, and critics claim that Brexit is being used as a scapegoat. So what's your view for the Great British Debate this hour? I'm asking, is Brexit to blame for the migrant crisis? I'm joined now by the Deputy Leader of UKIP, Rebecca Jane. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me. So, Rebecca, just let's cut to the chase. In your view, do you think Brexit is to blame?
Absolutely not. I mean, first of all, we don't actually have Brexit. We've got a cobbled together version of what our current leadership has decided to call Brexit, but it's not actually what people asked for. So no, and I absolutely agree. It has been made a complete scapegoat because everybody that didn't like the Brexit idea, whatever we're talking about, they use it as an excuse. Brexit's to blame for this, Brexit's to blame for that. Well, do you know what? If you did it properly in the first place, maybe it wouldn't be to blame for anything, and I don't think it's to blame in this case whatsoever.
Well, some people might point to the Dublin regulation, which meant that anyone who set foot in another EU country first could actually be returned to that country. So basically, we could return people to France, but now we are not part of that. Some people may put that forward as an argument.
I don't see how it's an argument whatsoever. I think you might have to explain that one a little bit better to me. I don't understand where that would come from.
Well, basically, we've all signed this deal that if you're part of the EU, if someone sets foot in an EU country first, they can't then move to another one and then try and claim asylum in another one. So, for example, the migrants who are in France, if they came to this country, we'd have been able to send them back, which is kind of what we were doing before Brexit. So that's that. I'm just saying that's what some people might point to as a reason. You may not.
No, they can point to it as a reason all they want. It's an incredibly weak argument. At the end of the day, if we had strong leadership in this country, we wouldn't need to be pointing fingers and making weak arguments. We can actually just say, do you know what? Our current government, you've got it wrong. Get a tougher stance, do something proper. You know, they have not put forward any proposition that is remotely workable, and they're just not getting a grip on this, just like they're not getting a grip on many things. So it's just another scapegoat, another idea, and anybody that doesn't like Brexit is always going to find these, well, what they think are loopholes, and in my opinion are just nonsense.
What about, because obviously now Rishi Sunak seems to be talking with Macron. I mean, it wasn't, to me, it looked a bit slimy. There's a bit of a bromance, but that's fine. If it means that we get a deal done, then that's great. Do you think that was one of the main reasons why we were struggling? Because you've pointed out that leadership is something that is lacking at the moment.
The leadership of this country is everything to blame. You know, we're getting passed off from one nonsense prime minister to the next one, and every single one of them is completely as useless as the next. So yeah, I think it's just, You know, I'm part of the UK Independence Party. It's not in our interest right now to call for a general election. However, for the benefit of the country, it absolutely would be. Personally, I'm wanting to hold on for a little bit longer so I can finish lining up candidates. But basically, it's our government and our leadership that are at fault for everything that is wrong today, and something has to be done, and we have to stop looking in all these other different directions and do something about it.
And briefly, why do you think that the migrants keep coming then in ever larger numbers? I mean, they literally don't seem to be worried about it at all. What do you think the main pull factor is?
Well, it's the 4- and 5-star accommodation and the luxurious holidays that they're getting. That's what it is. Honestly, it's an absolute nightmare to try and get accommodation in the northeast at the minute. That's because it's all taken up by immigration. And why on earth would you not want to come to this country? It's absolutely glorious.
Well, Rebecca, stay right there. Rebecca, stay right there.
Okay.
Stay right there, because I'm going to bring on Scarlett Maguire, then I'll bring you on together. So, Scarlett, you've heard what Rebecca says. I mean, Scarlett Maguire, she's a former Labour advisor and writer. Do you think that Brexit is being used as a scapegoat?
What Edi Rama, the president of Albania, said was that because of the Dublin Agreement, we can't just send people, because we're no longer in the Dublin Agreement, because we're no longer in the European Union, we can no longer automatically send people back saying, this wasn't the first safe country they came to, they need to go back. I mean, that's a no-brainer. That is a fact, that we're not a member of the Dublin Agreement anymore because of Brexit, and that for the Albanians, and actually for some of the others, that does add to the problem. And there are quite a few things like Erasmus, which was a university swap thing that was fantastic, that no longer exists. The Horizon programme, which was sharing science, that no longer exists.
But if we stick to the point, though, if we stick to the point of the
what I'm saying is there are things. If we go to the migrant crisis, that has an awful lot of other things apart from Brexit. And the biggest one is that actually, if you come over here, as we know, you will not be processed for 4 or 5 years because the Home Office just isn't doing their job. I mean, of course, what we should be doing is we should be processing people in days or weeks, sending back the people that we don't want and keeping the refugees. That's what we should be doing. But no, we're not doing. The reason people are in hotels is because they have to be put somewhere while they wait to be processed. It's because of a complete and utter failure of the Home Office asylum system that we're in this position. And,
Scarlett,
and it's terrible.
So you're not blaming Brexit at all. You're blaming the Home Office and the organisation and the system. So it's not Brexit then?
No, I'm saying that what Edi Rama said about Brexit and about the fact that we can no longer automatically send people in because we're no longer in the Dublin Agreement is absolutely right. And clearly all the Albanians know this, that they can come and now they have to be processed instead of being sent back. But what I'm saying is, I'm also saying that there are other problems, much bigger problems than the Dublin Agreement, about the asylum system, and it is because we are not processing people, and that's why we're putting them up in hotels.
Well, let me bring Rebecca back in on this then, Rebecca, because Scarlett's saying that half of me sounds like Scarlett isn't saying that it's Brexit to blame. She's saying the Home Office, there's a problem there, but obviously with the Dublin regulation, because we're out of the EU now, that no longer applies. So, I mean, I'm just wondering what your take is on all of that then, because she's also pointed out that it's the fact that we're processing people so badly. Yeah. You agree?
For me, that kind of just sounded like I've won the arguments, that it's not really Brexit's fault, because I didn't really hear one plausible reason. I understand the whole Dublin argument, what you're trying to say, but you know what I would also like to say to that is during COVID, I witnessed our government bringing in laws and very quickly adapting and changing for whatever they needed and wanted. We're in a crisis, so why are we now all of a sudden going back to before COVID times of, oh no, laws take forever and years and all the rest of it, and it takes 4 or 5 years to process stuff? we moved pretty quick on COVID, so why are we not moving pretty quick on a migrant crisis?
This isn't about laws. This is about actually making a system work. And the reason it doesn't work is because there aren't enough people doing the processing, right? So actually, since 2010, civil servants have been let go and let go and let go. So it's barely working. And what we need is proper trained people who can actually go in there. I mean, we have had people coming to this country seeking asylum, seeking refugee system, and as economic migrants for decades. I have never seen it this bad, where it can take years to process it.
Okay, so Scarlett,
I mean, that's appalling.
Because we've got about 10 seconds. In your view, then, is Brexit to blame?
Brexit is a small part of it, yes, but there are other bigger reasons.
And Rebecca, your final thoughts. Brexit, is it to blame?
No, it's the government, and I think you've just said everything that proved my point.
Thank you so much. That's Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire and also Rebecca Jane, Deputy Leader of UKIP. Thank you so much. Right, well, let's see what you've been saying. Louise says, I would say that the EU is to blame due to all the open borders allowing migrants to funnel through Europe unchecked. Andrew says, I think Brexit is partly to blame. Before we left the EU, asylum claimants could be processed in other countries. Since then, government policy has been that they have to be processed on British soil. And Tony says, it's more down to the French not doing enough on their side, but I do believe a deal may be coming that may finally put a halt to, or make it more difficult to cross the channel. Watch this space. Yes, please do. This, of course, is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, we will continue with that great British debate. I'm asking, is Brexit to blame for the migrant crisis? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, Associate Editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, also former Liberal Democrat MP, Nevid Opik. Then stay tuned, because at 5 o'clock in Outside the Chase, Sean Wallace, who's best known for being one of the 6 chasers on the hit show The Chase, will be in the studio. When Sean isn't quizzing, he's throwing himself into various charity projects. Stay tuned to find out more all about that. First, though, your latest news headlines.
Thank you, Nana. It's 4:33. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. His Majesty King Charles has led the Remembrance Sunday service for the first time as sovereign following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. The King and the Prince of Wales laid a poppy wreath at the Cenotaph in central London. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and former Prime Ministers were also in attendance. 10,000 Royal British Legion veterans representing 300 different armed forces taking part in a march to honour their fallen comrades. And a further 10,000 members of the public lined the streets of Whitehall to watch on and pay tribute. The Prime Minister is on his way to the G20 summit in Indonesia, where he'll call out Putin's regime over the war in Ukraine. Rishi Sunak will join the annual gathering of world leaders, saying this year's meeting will not be business as usual, with a focus on how countries can work together to solve global economic and security challenges. President Putin will miss the event and send his Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov instead. Turkey's President Erdogan says at least 6 people have been killed and 53 wounded in an explosion in Istanbul. The blast happened in a busy area of central Istanbul in Turkey, in the Taksim Square area. Emergency services were called to the scene and quickly cordoned off the area. It's still unclear what caused the explosion. And the number of migrants who've crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year has now surpassed 41,000. GB News understands around 300 migrants have been taken to Dover Harbour after attempting to journey so far today. Border Force vessels and RNLI lifeboats are also responding to a number of other small boat sightings off the Kent coast. Meanwhile, Downing Street says talks on a deal with France over Channel crossings are in their final stages. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations. for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good afternoon. If you've just joined me, welcome on board. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Don't forget, you can also stream the show live on YouTube. Now it is time for our Great British Debate. I'm asking, is Brexit to blame for the migrant crisis? Now, according to government figures, more than 40,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel this year, and over 10,000 of those have arrived on the shores have come from Albania. And earlier, Ed Rama, the Albanian Prime Minister, has attributed the current migrant crisis to Brexit. He said that the tough jobs roles needed to be filled, the British didn't want to do. But others believe that perhaps it's bureaucracy within the Home Office and tensions with France have led to a large influx, claiming Brexit is simply being used as a scapegoat. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is Brexit to blame for the migrant crisis? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by Associate Editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and also former Liberal Democrat MP, Lembit Ubik. Andrew Pearce, I'm going to come to you immediately. What is your view on this?
It's an outrage to blame Brexit. Let's first of all deal with this Albanian Prime Minister. There have been demonstrations on the streets in Tirana, the capital, for days now, because they've accused him with his policies, because Albania is a socialist basket case. The reason people are fleeing Albania is because there's no work for them there. So that's the first issue. But Brexit's nothing to do with it. The problem is the Albanians know that the French are just going to wave them over the channel because they want shot of them. It's nothing to do with the Dublin Agreement at all, because when we were in the EU, we didn't send them back if they claimed asylum, even if they've been in Italy, Greece, we never sent them back. So that is a completely bogus point.
The pull wasn't there.
No, so... but the reason they come here too, we're a soft touch. We give them benefits, we put them up in nice hotels, but certain members of my family would not be staying, couldn't afford 4-star, 5-star hotels. Very nice too. I mean, there's a shortage of hotel accommodation all around the country. The other problem is the Home Office is a basket case too. They're not processing these applications quick enough. And what we should do is, if they come from Albania, put them straight in a plane back. Because there's no war in Albania, there's no persecution, they're just economic migrants.
The greatest irony here is that I work with the relocation sector, high-value people coming to do necessary jobs, and I mean really well paid. And it's so hard to get them here because of the visa system. But if they got in a boat, they could get here without any real trouble. Obviously, that would be a ludicrous thing for somebody earning £100,000 a year to do, but it illustrates how messed up, as Andrew says, the system is. Now, what has to happen is nothing to do with Brexit. You can blame Brexit for everything or the weather. It's Brexit. Inflation rate, it's Brexit. But in reality, there is a big problem with Brexit. The total failure of a proper trade deal means that it's very hard to export manufactured goods from the UK into the EU. But that's nothing to do with the migrant crisis. We've got a ready-made 20-mile wide moat around the UK. And we don't seem to be able to make use of it. Now, how much would it cost to have enough drones, for example, to watch for every boat? And you can use infrared, so you see them at night. How much would it cost to have enough of a fleet to apprehend these boats? And how much would it cost to work with Wizz Air or some airline to say, listen, we're going to charter your planes once a week to do what Andrew said, say, if you haven't got a proper claim, you're off back to where you started.
Well, some people might argue that the relationship, because of Brexit, we have not a great relationship with France now. And before, our relationship was slightly better.
Yeah, but we pay tens of millions of pounds now to France to deal with this. And I think Macron's laughing at us. Now, look, I think Sunak and Macron got on well at COP27 last week, so let's hope something comes out of that. But the French have never wanted these people on their shores. But they don't put them up in hotels in Calais, do they? They have a campsite, and it's a dump. And that's where they stay. But we put them up in hotels. Why don't we just let them stay in a campsite?
It's interesting as well, because the Albanians who were protesting yesterday weren't happy with the way the migrants have been treated at some of the camps or at some of the accommodation there. Yet on the French side,
it's worse.
It's worse. So they're not protesting at all.
And if they don't like the way we treat them in Britain, they've got a choice. Don't come.
Yeah, this is the issue that's so dog in a manger. Now, I don't have issues with economic migrancy. I happen to live in London for economic reasons instead of in other parts of the country. And I don't have an issue with people wanting to better themselves. I don't, in a sense, really blame the migrants because they're choosing the easiest option. And that's what human beings do. I do blame the Home Office and the total ineptness, not just of the Conservatives, let's face it, the Labour Party before this, who just sat on their hands. And by the way, the figures we're talking about, that's not the whole number. No. They're the ones we know about.
Right, I agree with you.
So I'm going to ask you, I don't know, you might not want to say, but did you vote to leave or remain then?
I voted to remain, but I have to say a lot of what's happened since then rather proves the Brexiteers to be right. We were punished about everything from them trying to steal our vaccines, essentially kill us, for those people who believe in vaccines, right through to really making hay of Boris's, I think, rather poor performance in terms of negotiating a proper trade deal. I mean, that's actually the big problem we've got, and that's squeezing our manufacturing down. But notwithstanding that, I still think that to blame Brexit for the problem with the migrant crisis is to try and shoehorn a party political Ramona position into something which could be fixed whether or not we are in the European Union.
But the difficulty is it appears to be sending them back, doesn't it? And I think that's part of our own litigious system ourselves. But then it's part of the UNHCR, isn't it?
Well, it's Tony Blair's wretched Human Rights Act.
Yeah. And Theresa May's
Theresa May's Modern Slavery Act. And they're using the Human Rights Act to say we can't go back because they're gay or whatever the reasons are. There's an awful lot of gays, by the way, coming across the channel. And I thought all of a sudden, an awful lot of gay young men. You know, if only I was a bit younger when I was. Because let me tell you, there weren't that many around then. But it is extraordinary, and they're using this human rights legislation. It's bogus, and also they're on legal aid.
Yeah, but you see, that's
extraordinary.
Where our country is facilitating this.
Yeah. We are.
So, who, in a sense, we can actually blame ourselves.
It's our fault.
It seems to be
one of the problems.
We can't turn the boats round, apparently, because it breaks international maritime rules and regulations.
Oh,
in the same way, we can't stop oil protesters from blocking roads, even though they're breaking the law.
You've been quite outspoken about this yourself in the past, Nana, and you've got a wave of pile-on behaviour by people saying, oh, how outrageous to get tough on people crossing the channel. I am not against immigration. I'm not against people coming here and doing a good job. I'd be a hypocrite if I said that people shouldn't be allowed here for political reasons. My family came for that reason, and they worked really hard. What my problem is that the government completely, and this government and the previous government, completely failed to take seriously their responsibility, say, come here with good cause, but don't just sneak in and get away with it. And most people who do sneak across, I bet, get to stay.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the Home Secretary is talking the talk, and she talks it well to Suella Braverman, but she's now got to deliver. But she's got to take the Home Office civil service with her. That's tricky, because they do everything, in my view, they can to cause problems for Home Secretaries. Just ask Priti Patel what it was like. Her permanent secretary walked out because poor thing was being bullied by her. I mean, ridiculous.
Well, you know,
ridiculous.
The civil service. I mean, look, for me, I don't like the way the civil service operate. I mean, they were planning to strike, and then actually yesterday, in the papers, it said that they were striking deliberately to try and get rid of this current government.
I'm sure that's right.
I'm sure that's right. But the head of the PAC, so the union who look after the civil servants, actually said that. Actually said he was doing it to get rid of...
Well, I felt that for a long time, there's strikes all over, whether it's rail industry or in the NHS. I think there is a Conservative move to bring down the Conservative government.
Yeah. And on this issue, I'm pretty confident if Labour were in, they wouldn't do any better.
They'd do worse.
They would do worse because it was no better, even under Blair. Blair was whether you liked him or not, he's a competent Prime Minister, and they didn't do better on this subject.
No. Well, don't forget, Blair's government encouraged mass migration from Eastern Europe.
Well, of course.
Every other country, when the Eastern Bloc countries could start moving people into other countries, like Poland, they introduced transitional arrangements, so there were limits, not in Britain, which meant we got 750,000 in the first year. And Robin Cook, the Foreign Secretary, said at the time there'd be 15,000. They did it deliberately, hoping it would be they'd all vote Labour and screw up the Tories.
In the end, it just benefited big business who took advantage of cheap labour.
Cheap labour.
Which is why we are where we are. Well, this show is nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voice onto the show. Let's find out what they think about the topics that we're discussing today. Where should we go? Ooh, where's that? Where should we go?
I think we'll go to Solihull.
Let's have a chat to Brian Dugan. Right, Brian is there. Hello, Brian. Right, Brian Dugan, talk to me then. What do you think? Is Brexit to blame?
I don't think it's to blame. I think it would be wrong to say that Brexit is to blame. I think Brexit perhaps doesn't help in every regard. I mean, if we thought that the migrant crisis, as it's referred to, was going to go away, it was going to be solved because of Brexit, well, we were wrong about that. And I think that's one of the problems with Brexit. There was we were heavy on the sloganising and not so heavy on the substance. And that we've been left with kind of a hodgepodge post-Brexit with long-running feuds. We have no protocol in place in terms of Northern Ireland. That has decreased our stock with EU countries in terms of trying to negotiate the kind of deals that perhaps would alleviate some of the issues that have arisen, such as this. So obviously the Prime Minister, in terms of what he's trying to put in place with the French President Emmanuel Macron, we're told that something might be close. And that kind of bilateral working together, that bilateral agreement, that's something to be welcomed. And that's what we need to try and do. I think that Brexit has perhaps exacerbated some issues, but absolutely not to blame. The system is broken. We know that from the Home Office. We have 100,000 asylum seekers waiting to be
Don't do the list because we know it's a disaster. We know that. Brian Dugan, thank you so much. It's really good to talk to you. That is Brian Dugan, our great British voice. They're so knowledgeable. It's great, isn't it? Right, today I'm asking, is Brexit to blame for the migrant crisis? Lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Paul says the wokes will blame Brexit, and the reason why is that the UK is a soft touch. The French must be laughing at us. Yep. David says, isn't immigration what really started the Brexit talk and movement? Ish, but not quite. Wayne says soft laws are responsible for the crisis. I've also got a poll up on Twitter. Throughout the show, I've been asking, is Brexit to blame for the migrant crisis? Currently, only 10% of you say yes, which is what we thought. 90% of you say no. I think you're on the money there. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, Worldview. I'll be speaking to an ex-Russian spy who was infiltrating drug gangs. She studied at the same KGB school as Russian President Vladimir Putin. Yes, I'm excited to meet her. And then later on in this week's Outside, quiz and legend Sean Wallace will be live in the studio talking about his time on that hit TV show The Chase and all his charity work. That's all after this.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me. on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
On radio.
And online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
It's 52 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. It's time for World View. And now, as Russia have declared a new capital for the region of Kherson, and after Ukraine took back the annexed city following Moscow's retreat, joining me in the studio to talk about all of this is political commentator and Russian expert Danny Armstrong. Danny, OK, so talk to me about the reclaiming of Kherson. Is it? I mean, I don't want to get too excited, but it feels like it's a reality.
Yeah, of course. It's cautious optimism, I think, are the two buzzwords of this retreat. It's fully logical retreat, from the Russian forces. They couldn't really defend the slither of land that they had on the right bank of the Dnieper River. So they retreated to the left bank and then blew up the bridges for good measure. As we've seen, the crowds crying and waving Russian flags, Ukrainian flags. The Russian flags have gone, which is what I wanted to say, from the top of the administrative buildings. There's no more protest that we saw throughout from the occupation by the Russian forces in March. There's no more Russian forces dispersing these crowds with flashbangs and gunfire.
So they've gone.
It's absolutely gone. Last of the Russians have gone over the river. The city of Kherson is free. Russia does still occupy a large part of the Kherson region, so that's what we should be cautious about. What I would see now is Russian forces retreating and regrouping back to the Donetsk region. Then planning an offensive. So
It's not over. What about Putin? What's his response to this?
Putin's response has been, well, nothing really. I mean, this has been quite a loud, been quite a loud retreat from the Russian forces. But Putin has actually he said nothing about it. Russian state propaganda. Of course, that's my field, having worked for the Russian state channel for quite some time. They're struggling to spin this one. They're really struggling to focus on the positives that are, like I said, the regrouping and relocation and biding their time for an offensive. But what we really need to be looking at now is the bigger picture and what Putin is going to do. Because after the Kharkiv debacle, there was annexation of the 4 regions and mobilization. So now we're just looking at his response, which...
well, we'll see. We'll see. OK, thank you for that, Danny. I'm now joined by ex-Russian spy and supermodel Alia Rosa. Alia has infiltrated drug gangs and was taught in the same KGB school as Russian President Vladimir Putin. Thank you so much. You're so glamorous. Look at you. Tell me about life as a spy. Is the KGB as cutthroat as it seems?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everyone. And the KGB program is very, I would say, it's a top secret materials which were collected from many centuries, from Soviet Union to educate agents to be somebody like James Bond, and that's exactly what we can see when you see Putin, Mr. Putin, his photos when he's riding the horse, diving into bottom of the ocean. Isn't he like a really James Bond? Yeah.
So. But that must have been quite something to be part of that. How did it feel, and what was it like doing that, and then going from that to becoming a supermodel?
Well, thank you. I don't feel like I'm a supermodel. I do different kind of things. But see, I was 18 years old, and my father was a high-ranked general of KGB when he sent me there to a special secret Service Academy. And I didn't know anything, right? So I was selected as one of the 5 girls to be a future seductresses, a special agent. And my mission in the beginning was to stop human and drug trafficking from Afghanistan. And I did it successfully, but we learned so many interesting things like neuro-linguistic programming, like manipulation, like how to infiltrate people, how to influence people. So basically knowing all these techniques, you can easily make anyone to be your friend. You can seduce anyone. And even Freemasons, they use these techniques. That's how powerful they are. So I am very happy to share these techniques with public because they never been shared before. So I feel like I really want to, tell people how does it work. So I believe it will improve lives for sure, especially for women.
So in your opinion then, on the Russian-Ukraine conflict, what were you thinking? Where's your thoughts on that?
A very big manipulation. I mean, come on, like even her son, what's happening right now, I'm not sure that it is what everybody says right now, that Russia is kind of like losing in the war, or like Russia kind of like losing their positions. Because, well, knowing what Mr. President, what Mr. Putin knowing in terms of KGB special techniques, it could be part of manipulation, it could be part of the big strategy, and it could be just basically a trap, because he would never go and start the war without knowing that it will be beneficial for Russia. You know what I'm saying? So I would just wait how it will go further. But as I watched interview of Putin and Peskov, I think like they have bigger plan for that, to be honest.
Well, listen, Alia Rosa, it's so good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me. If people want to follow you, you're on Instagram. You've got like 1 million followers. What is your hashtag on Instagram?
Thanks.
What's your hashtag? Is it your name?
Alia Rosa. Yeah, ALIIAROZA. But you can find me on Rosa Spy, and I'm very happy to share these techniques with everyone.
Lovely. Well, listen, I'll follow you back, but if you don't follow me back, you're dead to me. Thank you, Alia. I'm joking. That's Alia Rosa, supermodel and
I will follow you.
spy. Wow. All right.
Happy Sunday.
Thank you so much. Let's travel over to America now, and we're going to speak to the host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Duddridge, because the results of the midterms are they fully in? And what was with regard to the abortion issue? So what's happening? The midterms, is it finished? Is it done now?
Not quite, no. There's a few more results to come in. It looks like the Republicans have lost control of, or any chance of winning the Senate, but it looks like they will still take a majority, a slim majority in the House of Representatives. So it's nearly over. I think there's a dozen or so House constituencies to declare still. And so they need to get, any party needs to get a 218 representatives in the House to gain a majority. And currently the Republicans are at 211. And it's obviously not the show that we were expecting from the GOP. But you brought up what we discussed 5 weeks ago. We discussed this about the abortion, the repeal of Roe v. Wade in the summer. And other pundits, we talked about this 5 weeks ago. And I said that the fact that women were registering to vote in numbers 2 to 1 with men as new voters, first-time voters, 2 to 1 outnumbering men, was going to be an issue. And other expert pundits were just saying, no, abortion is not going to be an issue. It is, and turned out to be the single issue. So this is not so much, the way this has been reported is a repudiation of Trump, and it isn't. It really is. There were MAGA supporters, there were Trump supporter women who were voting for the candidate that was protecting abortion rights.
Yeah. Well, listen, Paul Duddridge, it's good to talk to you. Thank you so much. That's Paul Duddridge, host of the Politics People podcast. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. More in the next hour. So it's just gone 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. Now, for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. On the way, it's outside. I'll be speaking to quiz legend from the TV hit show The Chase, Sean Wallace. We'll talk highs, lows, lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time to end reparations? All of that after your latest news headlines.
Thank you, Nana. Good afternoon. 1 minute past 5. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB Newsroom. His Majesty King Charles has led the Remembrance Sunday service for the first time as sovereign following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. The King and Prince of Wales laid a wreath of poppies at the cenotaph in central London. The wreath incorporated a ribbon which paid tribute to his late mother and grandfather King George by using their horse racing colours. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and former Prime Ministers were also in attendance. 10,000 Royal British Legion veterans representing 300 different members of the armed forces took part in a march to honour the war dead. And a further 10,000 members of the public lined the streets of Whitehall to watch on and pay their respects. Well, the nation fell silent to honour those fallen in the line of duty. Big Ben chimed 11 times at 11 o'clock to mark the start of the nationwide 2-minute silence. Services were held across the country, with bells ringing to commemorate all those who lost their lives. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace also commemorated the fallen and paid tribute to Ukrainians currently fighting for their freedom.
Today is a reminder that we've suffered wars in Europe before, and tens of thousands of British service personnel gave their lives as did civilians to defeat fascism. And here we are again, tragically, decades later, with a war on continental Europe in Ukraine. What Remembrance is about is recognising that freedom isn't free. People make sacrifices. This nation made the ultimate sacrifice on 2 occasions in the Great Wars, but also on other conflicts since, and Remembrance is a time to reflect on that.
The Prime Minister is on his way to the G20 summit in Indonesia, where he'll call out Putin's regime over the war in Ukraine. Rishi Sunak will join the annual gathering of world leaders, saying this year's meeting will not be business as usual, with a focus on how countries can work together to solve global economic and security challenges. President Putin will miss the event and send his Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov instead. The Chancellor has warned there will be very difficult decisions ahead of his upcoming autumn budget. Jeremy Hunt has warned that taxes will rise following his statement to the House of Commons on Thursday as he tries to balance the public books. He's thought to be considering a range of options, including an extended freeze on income tax and national insurance thresholds. Labour says further austerity is not the way forward. Turkey's President Erdogan says at least 6 people have been killed and 53 wounded in an explosion in Istanbul. The blast happened in a busy area of central Istanbul in Turkey, in the Taksim Square area. Emergency services were called to the scene and quickly cordoned off the area. It's still unclear what caused the explosion. 6 people are dead after 2 planes crashed into each other at a World War II airshow in the US state of Texas. The crash happened yesterday during flying demonstrations at the Wings Over Dallas event, which honours veterans. Videos posted online show the 2 planes colliding and crashing on the ground before bursting into flames at the Dallas Executive Airport. Firefighters say nobody on the ground was injured. The balance of power in the US has become clearer, with the Senate race in Nevada now projected to go to incumbent Democrat Catherine Cortez Masto. Her opponent, Republican Adam Laxalt, was endorsed by former President Donald Trump. This means Democrats will once again control the Senate regardless of the outcome of the Georgia runoff election. Control of the House of Representatives is still uncertain. Ukraine's president has described the fighting in the eastern Donetsk region as hell. Volodymyr Zelensky has praised the country's forces defending the region in what he says are fierce daily battles. Celebrations do continue in the city of Kherson, which was liberated from Russian control this week. But President Zelensky says Moscow destroyed all key infrastructure before their retreat, including communications, water supply and electricity. The number of migrants who've crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year has now surpassed 41,000. GB News understands around 300 migrants have been taken to Dover Harbour after attempting the journey so far today. Border Force vessels and RNLI lifeboats are also responding to a number of other small boat sightings off the Kent coast. Meanwhile, Downing Street says talks on a deal with France over channel crossings are in their final stages. And England have been crowned the T20 Cricket World Cup champions in Melbourne after beating Pakistan by 5 wickets. Ben Stokes was England's hero once again, taking them over the line with an over to spare. The victory marks the second time the team has won the T20 World Cup, and they're now the first to hold both global white ball trophies, having won the 50-over World Cup in 2019. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana Akua.
It is fast approaching 8 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. Joining me today is Associate Editor at the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and also former Liberal Democrat MP, Lembit Opik. Now still to come, each Sunday at 5, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP or someone who's had an extremely interesting career, and take a look at life after the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learned, and what comes next on the outside. And today, I'm joined by quiz-in legend Sean Wallace. Now, he is best known for his role as one of the 6 chasers on the hit TV quiz show, The Chase. He's also a qualified barrister, having worked at the Old Bailey. And when Sean isn't quizzing, he throws himself into charity work, most notably opening several houses in the northeast to help the homeless. For our Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time to end reparations? A climate minister has said that Britain shouldn't be blamed for climate damage before the world knew what global warming was about. That's after activists demanded Britain pay a staggering $1 trillion in reparations.
Loss and damage needs to be part of the core agenda of COP27. It is the duty and responsibility of Global North to understand our difficulties and our plight.
Whereas we acknowledge and are thankful that, all parties would have eventually coalesced around the fact that loss and damage is absolutely required.
And we expect the largest emitters to take responsibility and to do their part in loss and damage and mitigation and adaptation.
The wealthy nations like the UK and Ireland stepping up on their climate finance commitments to help low-income countries that are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis.
Well, just to be clear, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but to be clear, a Labour
Absolutely,
government
it's about supporting poorer countries, completely right. And let me just say, it's morally right, Laura, but it's also in our self-interest too.
Well, that's not to mention that the government has already paid out a total of $20 million for its role in this slave trade. When does it stop? Is it time to end reparations once and for all? Email me gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. So now it is time for Outside, and joining me this week is former chaser Sean Wallace. Now, you may have seen him destroying contestants on the ITV's hit show, The Chase. He's a trivia legend, but outside the TV, he's thrown himself into charity work. Sean has spent many years supporting local and large charities. He opened several houses in the northeast, which were renovated to a high standard in a bid to take the homeless off the streets. His aim was to give them their independence back. And as well as that, as well as helping them overcome drug addiction and finding employment, he's also rode the length of Great Britain, raising money for families who have been devastated during COVID. He often swaps quizzing for campaigning, has hosted numerous charity quiz events up and down the country, and he's a qualified barrister to boot. I'm pleased to say that Sean joins me live in the studio now. Sean, thank you so much for coming
Thank you for inviting me, Nana. By the way, I'm not a former chaser, I'm still a chaser.
You're still a chaser. Don't tell me you're former. Because I used to watch it all the time.
Yeah.
And my son, Ivory, he's only 5, but he was watching it all the time, and my ex loved the show. Talk to me about how you came to be on it and what it's like.
Well, what happened at the end of 2008, when I lost the Eggheads Grand Final, I was then contacted by ITV to take part in what they considered to be, quote, an exciting new game show concept. So I went along for the audition. So I'm the world's first chaser, actually. So I was working on that show by myself for about 4 months. Then in the spring of 2009, they brought in Mark the Beast Lebet. We then went up to do a pilot at the old Granada TV shows, and 13 years later, here we still are.
It's such a simple concept, but yet it works so well.
Yeah.
It's the basic, isn't it? It's easy.
It is. It's because of the fact that, you know, we've got a fantastic host who's witty, spontaneous, ad-lib. And also in relation to the fact that, although you don't see it behind the scenes, you know, from the person who runs to get us the coffee right up to the chasers, we respect each other. And I think that reflects and comes out in each episode.
Yeah, that's really good. And long may that show continue. Now, I know that you're also a part-time lecturer. You lecture in schools and things like that.
Yes, as I say, only last week I was at the Open University, because with fame comes responsibility, and it's important that I use my fame in an altruistic way to try and put the ladder of opportunity for the next generation of lawyers, chasers, Nobel Prize winners to actually climb up and, you know, take over when people like me are long shuffled off this small world.
I try that. I lecture in schools all the time. They go, "Oi, are you that bird on GBNews?" It doesn't work as well as being a chaser, I'm afraid to say. Now, you went on Mastermind. You were ranked, I think it was 286th in the World Quizzing Championships as well. I've always wanted to go on Mastermind. I know that your subject was about FA Cup, wasn't it, FA?
It was, but, you know, as I say, people might sort of denigrate the fact that it wasn't sort of, you know, on classical history or chemistry, but, you know, it still took the same intellectual rigour to actually, you know, every fact or figure which I could be asked, and I became the first black person to apply, let alone win the championship. So it was a great honour for me personally, for my family, but more importantly for the black community, because it showed that we do have the same intellectual capacity as our white counterparts.
All right, well, I've got a couple of questions for you then. Might as well, why not? Who won the FA Cup final then in 1971?
Arsenal. The goal scorers were Steve Highway, scored after extra time. Then Eddie Kelly became the first substitute to score. Then Charlie George hit the winning goal to give Arsenal the double.
I wish I'd brought my buzzers. I had buzzers as well. That's so annoying. All right, then what about in 1984? A very poignant year.
1984, that was Everton 2, Watford 0. The goal scorers were Andy Gray and Graham Sharp.
Wow. All right. 1999, the turn of the century.
That was Newcastle United 2, Newcastle United 0, Manchester United 2. Teddy Sheringham came on about 5 seconds after becoming a substitute. He scored the first goal, and Paul Scholes got the second goal to give Man United the second leg of the famous treble.
Oh, my God, an easy one then. 2021.
2021 was when we got turned over. You know, obviously I'm a big Chelsea fan, and we lost to Liverpool. No, 2021, did you say?
Yeah.
2021 was when Leicester beat us 1-0. I'm still smarting about that, because I still think that in the build-up to that fantastic goal by Tielemans, there was a handball which should have been given. But, you know, even though we lost that FA Cup, we then went on to win the Champions League.
I'll give him a round of applause at home. That's pretty good, just on the cuff. He didn't know that was going to happen. Wonderful, thank you so much. And you also, weren't you a finalist on the first series of Are You an Egghead as well?
Yeah, because after winning Mastermind, I retired from quizzing, because they weren't going to let me on shows like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Of course not.
You know, so I then decided to retire, but the BBC asked me to come out of retirement. And I got all the way to the grand final, and I was the only contestant out of the 32 who had to play the quarter-final, semi-final and final all in one day, because I could hardly say to a judge, by the way, Your Honour, can I simply nip out so I can do a quiz show? You would have told me where to get off, so...
What's it like being a barrister? I always wanted to do that sort of thing, because I used to watch Crown Court when I was young.
Well, that's what inspired me.
All the time.
That's what inspired me. I used to watch Crown Court, and one of my great legal heroes growing up as a young kid was the great John Mortimer KC. And one of the reasons why he was a hero of mine is because he was one of the top lawyers in his day, but he used his transferable skills as a barrister to become an accomplished author. And obviously, Horace Rumpole, although a fictional character, again, is one of my heroes. So
Isn't that amazing? I used to love that. And I was only young. Sometimes I'd try and get off school, pretend to be sick, and I'd watch that. And my mum would say, no, you're not bored of this. I used to love it.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic show. So being a barrister, what was your view on there was the strikes?
Well, as I say, I was firmly in favour of the strike. As I say, I still think that we settled far too early, unquote, because of the fact that we need to actually support the fact that the legal aid services is chronically underinvested and has been so for the last 30 or so years, mainly due to, as I say, in my view, some of the sort of negative headlines certain sections of the press were portraying that the barristers were fat cat lawyers who were earning money off the public purse, and nothing could be further from the truth. And as I say, you know, the bar has been, in terms of its diversity, in terms of talent, we've seen a paradigm shift in that. But we've also seen the fact that, you know, young lawyers have been earning something like less than £6.75 per hour. And what we're basically seeing is a drainage of talent in terms of young people being deterred from coming to the bar. We're seeing a collapse in morale in terms of experienced lawyers who basically are at the end of their tether. And if we don't actually invest in what was once considered to be the benchmark of all legal professions around the world, the legal profession will simply wither on the vine and die.
See, you know, I was until the strike. I was of the illusion that they were paid a fortune, and they were paid really well. And I think now that has happened, people have realised that is actually an illusion, and it's not really the way it is.
Absolutely.
Now, I know you do a lot of charity work. So talk to me about some of the stuff that you've been doing and why.
Why?
To do that?
Because with fame comes responsibility, and you know, I know what it was like to need help and assistance, and I think everybody has a special responsibility to try and help the next person who's less fortunate than themselves. So, as I said, a dear friend of mine, Jenny Roberts, asked me a couple of years ago to get involved in, you know, raising awareness in relation to the chronic problem so far as homelessness is concerned. And we went up to northeast of London, northeast of England, in Newcastle, to actually open some homes and projects, and to see the joy on the faces of people, you know, to actually have a stable home, a stable environment was just fantastic. And it's important that those type of plights and other institutions which do need help, you know, I will always use my fame in a way to try and help them. On Thursday, I'm going to be hosting a quiz to try and raise money for a cancer trust. And I think the way, because of the fact that I'm known as a quizzer, that's where I like to try and raise funds. A dear friend of mine, we hosted a quiz called it's called the Wonky Heart Foundation for a dear friend of mine who's a judge called Karen Holt. And we raised £7,000, you know, not only for problems so far as heart's concerned, but also in relation to people who sadly committed suicide. So it's important for me to actually use my fame to try and shine a spotlight on charities or small organisations who do need vitally needed funds, which were obviously devastated, especially in relation to the pandemic which we've recently come out of. And I'll always continue to do so in my own way.
Can people? Is there a website people can?
Well, they can always contact. Well, as I say, they can always contact my agents if they need help or assistance. And as I say, you know, it doesn't cost anything to try and help a person who's less fortunate than yourselves. It doesn't cost anything.
Well, throughout your career, because you've done so much, and a lot of people.
I've still got a lot to do.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, and people will see you as an inspiration and a role model.
Well, I don't like to use that phrase,
you don't
role
think so?
model.
Which
no, I like to use that phrase, goal model. And goal model.
Goal model instead.
Yeah, because of the fact that, you know, I'm human just like anybody else. I can make mistakes just like anybody else. And, you know, when people put you on this pedestal, you know, the fall from grace can be swift and unrelenting if you are on that pedestal as a role model.
Yeah,
so I'm comfortable closer to the floor. So, you know, follow the goals that I set so you can actually use those to inspire yourselves to actually reach your own goals and ambitions.
What would you say is your biggest goal so far?
I would imagine the biggest goal I've achieved would be qualifying as a barrister, because as an 11-year-old boy, I was like Muhammad Ali, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be the greatest. And if you talk the talk, you've got to be able to walk the walk. And as I say, you know, 40 years ago, you know, educational standards had a low expectation of people of colour. You know, if you're a young black boy, they expected you to either work in a factory, drive buses at best, or be living, sadly, in a prison. And if you're a young black girl, they expected you to either be a typist or secretary, or sadly living in a high-rise council flat with loads of children running around your ankles with no visible means of a man to support you. So any dreams or ambitions of being a doctor, lawyer, or dentist were seen as a complete anathema. There has been a tremendous paradigm shift, which is fantastic, but we still got a long way to go.
If you could give somebody a pearl of wisdom, what would it be?
Always have faith and believe in yourself. Tomorrow's never promised to anybody, but dream big and don't be frightened to dream to achieve your own goals and ambitions.
Sean Wallace, thank you so much for joining me. It's really good to talk to you. That is the amazing Sean Wallace. He's a barrister and a TV personality. Right, well, on the way, it is the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, is it time to end reparations? A climate minister has said that Britain shouldn't be blamed for climate damage. Before the world knew about global warming, after activists demanded Britain pay a staggering £1 trillion in reparations. And that's not to mention that the government paid a total of $20 million for its role in the slave trade. Is it time to end reparations once and for all? That's on the way after the break.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's 24 minutes after 5 o'clock. If you've just joined me, where on earth have you been? You've just missed Sean Wallace. But don't worry, you can catch up live on the GB News app. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. It's time for our Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, is it time to end reparations? As the COP27 climate summit in Egypt continues, a climate minister has said that Britain shouldn't be blamed for climate damage. Now, before the world even knew what global warming was, after activists had demanded that Britain should pay a staggering $1 trillion in reparations. Now, the comments come after Labour's Ed Miliband backed these calls, suggesting that because the Industrial Revolution started in Britain, taxpayers should subsidise other countries for the sins of the past. Here's what some of the things they've been saying so far.
Loss and damage needs to be part of the core agenda of COP27. It is the duty and responsibility of Global North to understand our difficulties and our plight.
Whereas we acknowledge and are thankful that, all parties would have eventually coalesced around the fact that loss and damage is absolutely required.
And we expect the largest emitters to take responsibility and to do their part in loss and damage and mitigation and adaptation.
Wealthy nations like the UK and Ireland stepping up on their climate finance commitments to help low-income countries that are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis.
Well, just to be clear, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but to be clear, a Labour
Absolutely,
government
it's about supporting poorer countries, completely right. And let me just say, it's morally right, Laura, but it's also in our self-interest too.
He's a bit annoying, isn't he? So I'm just joking. But when it comes to suggesting that Britain should pay for the past, it doesn't stop there. Let's have a quick look at this when a CNN host, Don Lemon, was lost for words after he raised the topic of colonial reparations.
To get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages. Absolutely, that's where they should start. And maybe, I don't know, the descendants of those families where they died in the high seas trying to stop the slavery, that those families should receive something too, I think, at the same time.
It's an interesting discussion, Hillary. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yes, he wasn't expecting that response. The UK government paid out a total of $20 million for its role in the slave trade. This figure represented a staggering 40% of the Treasury's annual spending budget, and in today's terms, that would equate to around about £16.5 billion. Experts have also calculated that the UK remains one of the largest global aid donors, with an annual budget of around about $11 billion. So where does it end? So for the great British debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time to end reparations? I'm joined in the studio by historian David Aldroyd. David, OK, the UK has an annual budget of about $11 billion in foreign aid. Can we afford to be giving money away in this manner?
Well, if we break down that 11 billion, about 3 billion of it is spent on things like housing migrants here. So though it's part of the foreign aid budget, it's spent domestically. And then the rest, some of it goes to the World Bank, for instance, which I think is more than able to fund itself. And then we have our global aid programmes. We can't afford it, and we should not be giving money to countries like Pakistan and India, which are able to fund nuclear programs. We certainly should not be giving money to countries we know to have an appalling record of human rights abuses, which we do at the moment. And it's interesting that we seem to forget in this country that there is an intellectual dissonance. Those people who say we should be giving more money abroad will say at the same time that we're a terribly poor country and we need to get used to being poor, and they would say that the only way to avert this is to join the European Union. So which do they think we are? Do they think we're rich enough to give away money to countries with nuclear programs and appalling records on human rights abuses, or do we think we're a poor country and we should look after ourselves first? If you think about the West Africa Squadron, we, over the course of 60 years, saved the lives of 150,000 slaves, African slaves, at the cost of 17,000 British sailors' lives. Now, as was mentioned in the VT there, should the families of those people whose lives were lost at sea, protecting the lives of slaves, receive reparations themselves? Well, there's an argument for that. But I should generally say, as a rule, reparations needs to be used in a very specific context, and that is immediately post any kind of conflict. To think that it can go on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years is essentially to say that history is a constant cycle of never-ending recrimination. I don't believe in that. I don't think it's good for international relations. I don't think it's good for a nation's conception of itself, constantly to be looking backwards and trying to find places where we have harmed other people.
And also, how far back do you go? Because if you went all the way back, you'd find that mankind came from Africa. And then we've only got, well, me to blame, frankly. Stay right there, though, David, because I want to have a chat with historian Martin Whittock. Martin, what's your view then? Because of the Industrial Revolution, it started in Britain. Do you think that we should be held responsible for the climate, any potential climate damage that people may perceive might have been as a result of any of that?
I think there is a connection, an unintended connection, of course, between our development and the fact that climate change is disproportionately hitting certain countries today. I mean, nobody intended that, of course, but some of the poorest nations of the world are facing the severest impact of climate change as a result of industrial policies. Nobody intended that, of course, but those industrial policies have enriched the wealthiest nations of the world. And what led to our prosperity, I know there are issues now, and I very much recognise that, but overall, globally, what led to our prosperity is leading to a disproportionate experience of the effects of human-caused climate change for other countries. And I think this has to be met by a multinational response. It's not just a UK thing. I mean, nations like USA and China face huge responsibilities. And it's not just for the old emitters, it's the recently developed ones too. But I really do think that given the kind of crisis that many poorer nations are facing, we do need a Marshall Plan for climate change. Of course, the Marshall Plan was that hugely generous plan that the USA paid in the aftermath of the Second World War to get Europe back on its feet after the catastrophe of the World War. So yes, I do think that we do need to target and work with poorer nations because we've benefited from much of the technological advantage that's now to their disadvantage.
So on that
Yeah,
theme,
sorry.
so what about things like, for example, the spinning jenny, the locomotive, all the things that, say, this country created and invented that were of benefit to others? Is there no sort of kickback to look at actually we are a net benefit? Because some of the things that we've used, whilst we may have initially emitted a lot of carbon, China are emitting a lot and others are emitting, places like Brazil and the Amazon, they're chopping down the rainforest, so they're taking away carbon. If we go down that road, we kind of find ourselves on a very shady path, surely.
It certainly is complicated, and I'm not for a moment saying that the only contribution of the UK, to world development is negative. That would be absolutely false and just plain wrong. But what I am saying is that a great deal of the economic change that has happened since 1750, for example, 1800, we now know is having a disproportionate effect on the climate. And we're actually saying to other countries, you mustn't develop because it will actually add to a problem that we've caused. But I think this isn't just a moral issue, and obviously we didn't mean to cause it. This isn't just a moral issue. I think it is also one of self-interest too.
Can I bring David
the kinds
in on
of movements of people that's challenging us now will be dwarfed by what is to come if these poorer nations implode under the weight of climate change-caused crisis. So I think for the good of all of us, we have to act in this area.
David, your view on that?
Well, it's fine to say that we bear an historic responsibility. We do, but the scale of that is minuscule. Compared, if you want to think about the Industrial Revolution, the actual emittance of carbon for which we are responsible was minuscule. And let's think about it. Who are the biggest emitters of carbon in the world now? China, the USA, Russia, India. And they are going to contribute, if you just take 1 year, they contribute more than we did in a decade. So who should be contributing here and in what proportion? But the realistic point is that none of these large emitters are going to be brought to the table. None of them are going to take part, for instance, they didn't take part in COP27. None of them are going to take part in the system of global reparations. So yet again, it comes down to the UK and other Western European nations who are essentially soft touchers to these plans, well-meaning planners but misguided plans, who will, with much smaller budgets and with much lower responsibility for what is quite rightly conceived to be a difficult and globally pressing issue, it is those people who will be asked to pay the bill. Now, if some magic person can get Brazil, Russia, India, China, the US, Canada, Australia to the table on this, then I would say there's a conversation to be had. But at the moment, it's pure flagellation of the UK.
Well, listen, we are running out of time. So if you've got a brief response or maybe 20 seconds, Martin, have you got anything to respond to that briefly?
I absolutely agree that other people have to chip in here, but I think we have an opportunity here to set a moral tone, to set a moral standard and call for other people to step up to the plate as well. So I hear what you're saying, but I think now's the time for a bold statement on behalf of the poor and challenge others to step up to the plate too.
That's as long as we're not the poor, I think we might be. Martin Whittock, thank you so much. That's Martin Whittock, he's a historian. And David Aldred-Bolt, he's also a historian. Thank you so much for joining me, both of you. Right, let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Elliot says, I don't think they should ever begin, and no nation in the entire history of the world is truly without dark deeds. They would never not now commit. Lisa says, yes, people living now are not responsible for the sins of their ancestors. Jackie says, not a chance. It's a ridiculous thing to even consider. Our country is doomed with Hunt and Rishi Sunak in charge. Well, that's what people are saying. Keep saying your thoughts. Keep telling me what you think. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We'll continue our great British debate this hour. I'm asking, is it time to end reparations? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, Associate Editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and also former Liberal Democrat MP, Lemid Opik. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 5:34. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB Newsroom. His Majesty King Charles has led the Remembrance Sunday service for the first time as sovereign following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. The King and Prince of Wales laid a poppy wreath at the cenotaph in central London. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and former Prime Ministers were also in attendance. 10,000 Royal British Legion veterans representing 300 different armed forces took part in a march to honour their fallen comrades. And a further 10,000 members of the public lined the streets of Whitehall to watch on and pay tribute. The Prime Minister is on his way to the G20 summit in Indonesia, where he'll call out Putin's regime over the war in Ukraine. Rishi Sunak will join the annual gathering of world leaders, saying this year's meeting will not be business as usual, with the focus on how countries can work together to solve global economic and security challenges. President Putin will miss the event and send his Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov instead. Turkey's President Erdogan says at least 6 people have been killed and 53 wounded in an explosion in Istanbul. The blast happened in a busy area of central Istanbul in Turkey in the Taksim Square area. Emergency services were called to the scene and quickly cordoned off that area, and it's still unclear what caused the explosion. And the number of migrants who've crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year has now surpassed 41,000. GB News understands around 300 migrants have been taken to Dover Harbour after attempting the journey so far today. Border Force vessels and RNLI lifeboats are also responding to a number of other small boat sightings off the Kent coast. Meanwhile, Downing Street says talks on a deal with France over Channel crossings are in their final stages. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It's fast approaching 40 minutes after 5 o'clock. If you just joined me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. We are the People's Channel. Now, as the COP27 climate summit in Egypt continues, a climate minister has said that Britain shouldn't be blamed for the climate damage before the world even knew about global warming. That's after activists had demanded that Britain should pay a staggering £1 trillion in reparations. Now, Labour's Ed Miliband had also backed these calls, suggesting that because the Industrial Revolution started in Britain, we should be paying for the sins of the past. And when it comes to paying for the past, Britain, excuse me, has paid out a total of £20 million for its role in the slave trade. And experts have also calculated that the UK remains one of the largest global aid donors, with an annual budget of around about £11 billion. So for our Great British debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time to end reparations? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by Associate Editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and also former Liberal Democrat MP, Lembit Opik. Right, I'm going to start. I started with Lembit last time, Andrew last time, so I'll start with you, Lembit. Reparations.
Have a guess. When I hear people going on about reparations for the damage we've done to the climate,
I would point out there is no climate crisis. If we're going to start paying reparations for things that aren't happening, then where does that end? One example, Tuvalu, it's an archipelago of islands, far, far away, over 100 islands. They want, essentially, reparations from us to protect them from the fact that they're sinking under the sea. And their foreign minister made this dramatic speech last year for COP26 when he was up to his
I remember
knees.
that, yes.
Yeah. So I looked into it to see how much land they'd actually lost. Between 1973 and 2014, they gained over 200 acres.
Well, that was a very dramatic
74% of the islands got bigger. But we're going to give them reparations? Oh, well, dream on. Yeah, this is the problem. I like Martin Whitty, who just had it on, but he seems to, I'm sorry to say this, Martin, but he seems to know nothing about the fact that the claims which are being made about the damage we've done to the climate are actually false.
Well, what about the Maldives? They said that was going, they're still here, aren't they? They said they'd be underwater.
Oh, yeah, and Al Gore, the man who has made a fair packet one way or another, said that all the ice of the North Pole would disappear, I think, by 2015 or 2016. Now, I'm using this as one example of reparations. There are times I think that there was at least a notional statement of intent whenever Britain did pay something back in terms of the slave trade. But £1 trillion, just give me a break. The world's getting greener. That's what extra CO2 does. It doesn't really drive climate. I haven't got time to go into that now, but there is no climate emergency.
We wish you would.
Oh, OK, then. Yeah, the world's getting greener. But the whole thing, this is the greatest fraud in recent political history. And on top of the fact that CO2 isn't, and human-caused CO2 isn't destroying the world, we've now got all these people on the bandwagon, including apparently Miliband, who's once again not a stupid person, who's now saying, oh, well, let's give all this money for something which isn't happening. Well, the whole principle of endless reparations undermined by the stupidity of this climate fraud.
Well, some people would say that it is happening, and there is a big argument that it's CO2 that is the cause of it, although I do agree that the science, for me, I'd need more to go on. But, Andrew, what's your view?
Well, who are we going to pay it to?
Well, exactly.
Are we going to pay it to India? Who are spitting out more junk and poison into the atmosphere than we are. India, who's developing its own space programme. Pakistan, doing something with its own nuclear programme. How do we decide which British taxpayer is responsible for this so-called climate damage? It's absurd. How have they got the figure of £1 trillion? Where did it come from? I'll tell you where it came from. Thin air. Plucked from thin air. It's absurd. And we mustn't forget the Industrial Revolution brought great benefits to large parts of the world. Life expectancy increased as a result. Yes, we shoved kids up the chimney. Are we still going to be paying for It is the great con. And the use of the word reparations, by the way, I find particularly offensive, because that's what countries pay for their part in a war, particularly when they've lost. We do not owe the third world, if we can still call it that. Can we still call it the third world? I don't think we can.
Developing world.
Developing world, yes.
The developing world, either way. I mean, the resources in those countries are far greater than the ones here. So if you look at it, in actual fact, those countries are far richer, and those countries have actually been taken advantage of financially by people like China and this country and other countries for the goods and products that they have. But ultimately, those people are selling their things. So even with the slave trade, the black people sold their people to become slaves.
Nigeria,
so how far do you go back?
Nigeria is accused of being complicit in the slave trade. So are we going to pay them reparations, or are they going to pay us? And if we're going to go back in history, shall we go back to the Vikings? Because they used to come into north of England and Scotland and take people back to what is now Sweden, Denmark, Scandinavia, as slaves. We know they have found skeletons of manacled skeletons from the Roman era in Britain. Right, so the Italians owe us a lot of money for the slave trade here. And where does it end?
Well, let's add on to that the Vichy government, which was complicit with the Nazis. So let's call Macron and say, look, how much are you going to pay in reparations? This is the insanity of a blame culture, which then becomes a cash culture. The reason I get so angry about the environmental one is, number one, it's scientific nonsense, absolute nonsense. But number two, when you've got places like India, which is entirely entitled to get to our standard of living if they can get there, they can't have it both ways, because, as you said, then they should be pumping money back in for all the stuff they're pumping out. And China, what are we going to do there? Because we've exported our emissions to China. They manufacture the stuff there and then we buy it back.
Well,
so do we have to pay reparations for China's emissions?
Well, also in the last 8 years, China has pumped out more CO2 than we did in the entire industrial revolution.
That's absolutely true.
And the reason they're doing that is because we're buying things from them. Other countries, the world is buying from them. So we all need to reparate each other. It just literally makes no sense, and it feels like it is a money grab.
I'm not sure either, Nana, where it's come from. Who's saying we've got to pay these?
Tell you where it's come.
Is it the United Nations? I mean, where's it come from?
It's come from this fraudulent green agenda, which says it's a religion. The world is going to end. It's all your fault. But if you pay, you will be saved.
Well,
it's a classic part. This is actually a massive driver.
Let's blame Greta Thunberg.
Let's blame her.
Blame her.
There are
Very
elements
irritating.
of this green agenda. So, for example, let's not pollute our rivers. Let's not do those things.
Absolutely.
But I think that they're sort of mashing it all together with CO2 and climate change, which I personally don't subscribe to the full thing. I need to hear more. I need to hear more people giving me the knowledge and science and how they're coming to that position. But I think, we shouldn't pollute our rivers. We shouldn't be chopping down the Amazon rainforest. The Brazilians or the people in the Amazon owe us reparations for getting rid of all the CO2 or the good stuff out of it. So we could go on like this forever.
Indefinitely. I talked to Just Stop Oil the other day. They bombarded me with these apocalyptic predictions and forecasts. Every time I said, evidence, please. Where is it? They don't have it.
Of course they don't. It's an emotional gambit, really. Yeah. One more example for you on the bigger point of reparations. We all said, well, the West said, oh, we must get away from fossil fuels. Maybe we'll use palm oil. So a whole bunch of people abroad cut down their trees.
Palm oil.
We should be paying reparations to them for making them do it in the first place.
We've got it wrong. We've got it wrong on so many things. Well, listen, I'll tell you what, we want to hear your thoughts because this show is nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voices, their opportunity to be on the show and tell us what they think about the topics we're discussing. I've got 3 of you today. Right, so where should we start? I'll start with you. Olivia Parry in Surrey. Reparations, what's your view?
Hi, Nana. How are you? Lovely to see you. Yes, well, can we afford it, first of all? We have a £60 billion black hole, and the Chancellor keeps on warning us about the budget that we're going to get. Taxes are going to have to go up. So, can we afford it? In 2020, the UK spent £14.5 billion on foreign aid. Yes, that's slightly different to reparations. No, I don't think we should make reparations. I mean, just looking at Pakistan, and I've lived in the subcontinent and I've lived in the Middle East, so I don't want to upset any of my friends over there.
Oh, go on, upset them. They're not watching.
Over the past 30 years, a quarter of Pakistan's forest cover has been lost. Yeah. So maybe that's contributing to all this terrible flooding?
Well, there you have it, Olivia. Well, listen, I've got to move on to Alan McNeely. He's there in Grimsby. Alan, your view briefly, Alan.
Well, I tend to agree with Lambert. Nana, good afternoon, by the way. I mean, it's just absolute nonsense. It's another virtue signalling, greenwashing lunacy that these people seem to promote. There's no, the benefit that came from the Industrial Revolution was absolutely massive. It took billions of people out of abject poverty. It increased life expectancy by nearly 50 years. And we're supposed to feel guilty about that. This is all about making you feel guilty for something that actually, I agree with Lem, it never happened. It's not happening.
I think it's all about making money, actually. It feels like more about making money. Lastly, Mike Donovan there in Oxfordshire. Mike.
Hi, Nana. Good to see you. Well, the climate change, I mean, it is a fraud. I mean, we haven't really had proper scientific debate on this. It's driven by a global agenda. And that's a global agenda with huge slush funds. I mean, what we need in this country is credit creation for our own businesses. SMEs drive the real economy, not a credit creation for for driving up asset prices and the boom-bust cycle. No, we shouldn't give reparations to anyone. We need to deal with our own home turf first.
Thank you so much,
that's
Mike.
my view.
And
it's about time we had politicians who did that.
Thank you, Mike. Absolutely.
I'd just like to
Thank you so much to Olivia in Surrey. No. Thank you. Thank you very much to Olivia in Surrey, Andy Grisby and Mike in Oxfordshire. No, she's lovely. She's lovely, she's fabulous, but she knows the code. Right, so today I'm asking, is it time to end reparations? Lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Mark says the rest of the world should pay the UK for the Industrial Revolution. We are owed a massive debt. Pay up. Thomas says no, especially when it comes to climate change. Save the planet while we can. Gina says they should not have been raised in the first place, not for slavery, not for climate change, not for anything. Well, thank you so much for your thoughts. Very, very interesting. And I think you're all very right. We're looking for somebody who has a different idea. If you do, please let us know. But moving on to another story that caught my eye, a small Japanese spacecraft will embark on a 3-month journey to the moon at the end of the month, set to usher in an entirely new era of space usage. The company iSpace plans to collect moon dust from the surface and sell it to NASA. And although the contract is just for a small fee of $5,000, it'll be the first business transaction ever to take place off Earth. But the mission has raised some key questions about who owns the moon or any space resource and who should be allowed to exploit it. So let's see what my panel make of that. Lembit, I'm going to start with you. Lembit, who owns the moon?
The universe owns the moon. Classic, great question. We could see moon wars, maybe not Star Wars, but moon wars over this, because it's very resource-rich. I declare an interest. As you may remember, I'm chair of Parliament for Scardia, the world's first space nation. And we're trying to answer these questions so that when we do go up there, we don't end up with a turf war, a little bit like what happened when we sort of discovered America, but somebody was already living there.
Yes, it's not really ours.
So in essence, there's tons and tons of space law, but it really doesn't matter a jot. If you actually get there first, especially at the South Pole of the moon, where there's a whole lot of frozen water, that's going to be a gold mine. And frankly, I suspect that possession is 99/100ths of the law on this.
Not unless somebody's there before you. You just haven't seen them. What about you?
That boring climate change lobby, they'll probably say it's theirs, don't you think? They want to take over everything else, and they'll obviously have an issue with us going up to the moon and trading, won't they? Because that's bound to be causing even more problems in the... But I love stories like that.
Yeah, it's great.
I'd love to go to the moon. It's my great ambition. And if it
works,
I'd love to go.
Costs you €100 to be in a Scardian.
Well,
you're on your way then.
All right.
There's nothing there, though. That's the problem.
Doesn't matter.
I just
want to see it.
Yeah.
I just want to see it.
There's no atmosphere. If you just join me, I'm Nana Akua. Joining me on my panel as Associate Editor at the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and former Liberal Democrat MP, Lembit Opek. Right now, it's time for Supplement Sunday, where me and my panel discuss stories that have caught our eye. Let's start with Lembit's story, which is about magic mushrooms. Lembit.
The Telegraph. I took magic mushrooms. I'm reading this, by the way. I took magic mushrooms at 64, obviously reading it, and the fog I've lived under my whole life lifted. This is a really interesting story about some new, a new pill, if you like, which created a totally different life for the previously depressed Steve Shawnee. He quotes, "It was revelatory. There were times when I felt like I was in a kaleidoscope. The unreality, the colours, the sound is so much bigger and brighter and more extreme than anything you can imagine." Leaving aside, that sounds a bit like a Beatles song. It does seem that this stuff is amazing. It's not like something you get addicted to, but it's lifted his depression, which he lived under for his whole life. If this is true, then maybe we're finally beginning to find a solution which can otherwise lead people to drug addiction and alcoholism and ultimately death. So I think this, I hope it's true. I think it's really promising story.
Are you going to try them?
If it's legal, well, I don't
If it's legal, hang on.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, I'm not just going to go off and go outside down to the station and say, "Oh, can I have some of psilocybin?" I've said it wrong, I'm sure, yeah. Psilocybin, yeah. I would try it if I had a prescription. The doctor said, "This will cheer you up." I would do.
Yeah, well,
I'm actually curious anyway.
Andrew, what do you feel?
Great story about Harry and Meghan. You know I'm not great fans of them. They're at some big gala dinner in December the 6th. They're being honoured by the Kennedy Foundation, that's JFK's family, for their humanitarian work. What humanitarian work is that, then? What philanthropic work?
To the royal family.
Exactly.
Didn't they do that thing for vaccine equity? That sick thing.
They've quoted
Netflix.
The Mail and Sun have done the homework. They've quoted a professor of the Pulitzer Prize professor who's written all about the Kennedys, saying, "Old Joe Kennedy, the patriarch of the family, would be turning in his grave." What have they done? Barack Obama's won this award. Bill Clinton's won this award. They don't deserve it. They don't deserve it, and it's a joke, and it's causing a hoot in America.
Ridiculous. What on earth have they done?
What have they done?
Well, they've got that book coming out.
I mean, that's not going to be very humanitarian. That's going to be rather cruel to the Queen Consort, we understand.
Yes.
They're going to be spreading more mayhem and trouble from it. Honestly, they are ridiculous.
Just give them some psilocybin and
yeah, maybe.
Shut up.
When the legal, oh, I'd dread to see that. Well, finally, on to my story. Now, sharing menus are on the rise in UK restaurants as customers are cutting back. And a restaurant in Cheshire has started a whole sharing menu of modern British foods, as chefs hope the concept will tempt diners to spend little more and fight the cost of living crisis. Now, Linden Stores in the Cheshire village of Aldlam has started a whole sharing menu on modern British food, with 2 people sharing 7 dishes, including chard, pepper, Cornish quartz, cheddar, croquettes and stuff like that. I don't think so. I just want to ask you,
posh menu, wasn't it?
Are you up for sharing? Are you somebody who shares your food?
No.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Really?
Well, I actually did it this afternoon. Before I came here, I was in Lapland. It's been relocated to just south of Slough, would you believe? And I had a ginger biscuit, which I gave to Angelina, and she said, "Thank you for sharing your food, Daddy." So I did it today before I even knew this was on the show.
Sweet.
Well, listen, if you think you're going to share my food and your hand comes towards my plate, I'll stab your hand with my fork.
Quite right.
First on
GBNews.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Not sure that's legal either.
Well, I mean, listen,
stabbing him
on
in
the
hand.
show, I've been asking you whether it's time to end reparations. And so far, well, what have you been saying? Well, so far, people have been saying, loads of people have been saying lots of things, because I personally think it is time to end reparations. I had it all queued up as somebody's just
disappeared.
A massive majority agreeing with us.
What's happened to our poll on Brexit? Is Brexit to blame for migration?
Well, last time I looked, it was 90%.
I think it would have gone up.
I think it's probably gone up. Well, listen, thank you so much for your company. Thank you so much to my wonderful panellists, Andrew Pearce, and also the lovely Lembit Opik on today's show. I have been asking, is Brexit to blame? 13% of you say yes, so it's gone up a little bit. 87% of you say no. I'm going to say thank you to you at home for your company. As ever, I'll be back on Friday at 4. I'll leave you with the weather. Take care. Enjoy your week.
So looking ahead then to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry in the east, but cloud and rain moving in from the west. Let's home in on the detail. Generally dry and cloudy across the southwest of England, some clearer spells, a band of rain and strong winds in the far west, slowly moving east. Feeling mild though, highs of 15. Remaining dry in the southeast of England, some clear spells in the evening and overnight, winds staying light with some patchy mist and fog later. Then cloudy across most of Wales with some clearer spells in the east, winds increasing at the coast with rain arriving in from the west later. Taking a look at the Midlands, it'll be much cloudier there, particularly in the evening across the region, but staying mostly dry. Some clearer spells at times. Southeasterly winds remaining light, however, it will be breezy over high ground. And remaining cloudy across the northeast with outbreaks of light rain and drizzle, some clearer spells confined to the west, breezy at the coasts, but lighter winds inland. And staying dry across most of southern Scotland. Cloudy in the east, patchy light rain and drizzle at times, breezy at the coasts, particularly in the west.